punctual. They arrived at about 5 o'clock. She played the part of the hostess, invited them in, offered them her husband's best cigars, brandy, and when they said to her, where's your husband? Oh, he's gone fishing in Friesland. It's good for him. Then they said to her, after about an hour of playing this little cat and mouse game, they said to her, you're going to have to come down to the office. She was confused and said, but I told you my husband is not in his office. He's gone fishing in Friesland. And they said, no, our office, which rather sent a chill through her. And she said, I'll get my coat and my purse. And they went, don't bother. And so they put her in a staff car. That was the last time she saw her home. That was September 1941. She would not see that house again until April 1945. She was taken to Amstelveense prison. And of course, they didn't tell her that they'd found the card on Moyer. Didn't mention him at all, in fact. But they gave her a list of names. And in the beginning, she tried to sort of bluff her way through, but was growing more and more desperate as she heard more and more names that she actually did recognize. So she was moved to Veteringham prison. Now, this is now the Holland Casino. I love that, One time you used to risk your life. Now all you do is lose your money. The original part of the prison, there's that little peak standing up there in the middle of the photograph. But what is really poignant is that because, we've moved on and it's good times all around, but when you actually go through the archway and you look on the other side of a pillar towards the back that's on a courtyard, there is a huge crystal teardrop commemorating everybody who passed through those doors when it was a prison and who never came out again during the Second World War. So the memory is still there. It's just quiet. Now I'm going to go back to a couple of slides. This was a card that Mona wrote to her father the day that war was declared, and saying, well, the worst has happened. I sit by the radio constantly. Isn't it too dreadful? Billy is still ill, poor thing, and we are most unhappy over world news. Of course, I don't go to Canada now. So she had planned a trip, and actually, apparently, Willem tried to convince her to go back to Nova Scotia because he wasn't sure what would happen. Although she was a Dutch citizen, it would become known that she was a Canadian, therefore British, therefore an enemy. But she said, no, I'm toughing it out. I'm staying here. So that was the first card that sent and got through. But as time went on, of course, and I included this one because you couldn't send cards to Canada. You had to send them through the States. So she was sending it to her dad, care of her husband's company. But there's the eagle and the swastika from the German censors. And eventually, there was a C from the Canadian censor, which for some reason isn't on that when it was passed over the border. Now, Lee van Oldenburg, I told you about her before. She was in that photograph way in the background. When Lee found out that Mona had been taken prisoner, she was outraged. And so she wanted to go and visit her. And her description of this was absolutely wonderful. She said, I'm terrified. Like, there are Nazis everywhere. And, but, she's a woman of culture and brave enough in her own way. And so she went into the prison and she was allowed to take a little care package, women's feminine products and needle and thread, that sort of thing. Of course, it was searched before she went in. And there were biscuits, little treats. And so she said, I was taken into this room where she said Mona was brought in as though she was completely oblivious of the guard and said, how lovely of you to come. And sat down and she said, we had this lovely conversation and Lee said, well, I've been talking to some friends because this is, of course, at a time when some people were in favor of the Nazis, and then you found out that, some of your friends you didn't know as well as you thought you had because now they're working for the administration. And so Lee said she'd identified a friend of theirs and she was going to go and talk to him to see what could be done about getting her released. The guard said it was time to leave. And Mona got up and shook her hand again, and she said, I nearly died because I felt her put something in my hand. And I thought that somebody must have seen it, and she said, and I walked away from the prison, and she said, and I had it in my hand. It wasn't until I got some distance away. She's written on a piece of toilet paper a list of things that she wants removed from her house. Now, some of them were fine and vintage wines, but there were papers and jewelry, anything that she felt could be carried out easily. But she was damned if she was going to let somebody, and she knew Nazis would move in because it was a lovely house. She was damned if she was going to leave these things for somebody else to enjoy. And so Lee, along with Beth, the housekeeper, went back to the house. They filled crates. They knew they had one night. And apparently, she also notified Willem's brother, Georg, who arrived with a van from the company and took out some of the furniture, some of the antiques and paintings, and got that out of the house. But Lee and Beth filled these crates, took them back to Lee's place, and buried them in her garden. And they were going to be there for her when she got out. So Lee did go to their friend and ask for, what can we do to have her released? He said, absolutely nothing. I advise you to turn your back, walk away, or you too shall come under suspicion. And Lee said to me, I had 2 young children. I did what I could, but I couldn't do as much as she did. So this was Lee when I interviewed her in 2000. 2000. Now, when Mona was sent to trial, she was held from September, when she was arrested, without trial, without representation, without being told anything that was happening to her. She was given a piece of ticking filled with straw on a floor to sleep on. I think they thought this was a woman of refinement and culture. All it's going to take is a few days sleeping in those conditions, and she'll tell us what we need to know. Well, big surprise, she was a lot tougher than they thought she would be. Now, when she found out that Dirk Brouwer had been executed, that certainly sent a shockwave through her. But she also found out through these notes she was able to pass, they let her send out laundry to be done, and she would tuck little toilet paper, because the very stiff toilet paper, it's not like we have here, but she would tuck it into the waistband or into the hem of something, and then they would put another message in. So she found out that actually they paid somebody a vast amount of money to pay to somebody else to go to the prison to get her out one night, and of course it was a lie. And for that, her chauffeur who was involved, DeBoer, lost his life as well, which absolutely shattered her. But she didn't give up. And on the morning of the 21st of December, 1941, she was taken from her prison cell at 8:30 in the morning, not told anything other than get dressed. And she asked why, and they said, because you're going to trial. What she didn't know was that her husband had been found the day before. So they figured they had everything they wanted. There was no point keeping her now to put her on trial. Now, I found out she was one of the first and few women to be tried by a military tribunal in Holland at that time. She so surprised them because she had no representation, and the fellow that they gave her, the lawyer they gave her, spoke German, no English, very little Dutch. When she objected, they actually found another fellow who spoke a little bit more, but not enough for her to be able to get translation or to follow what was going on. So she said, I just waited. I waited, and it went on. She said it was quite evident that a couple of them hated me. And when she was told to rise for Todesstrafe, that was the thing that got her attention because it was death. And so she stood up and she said, I thought of my father, and I thought, I will not cry. I am made of better stuff. And they pronounced her sentence, and when she felt that it was over, she simply clicked her heels together, said, Meine Herren, guten Morgen, and turned to be led from the courtroom. Now, she said if the prosecuting lawyer was livid, one of the fellows, the chief of the tribunal, was so impressed that he actually followed her out and said, Madam, such courage, I will permit you to appeal this sentence. And he arranged for her to have a pencil and paper when she got back to the prison, and she wrote out her appeal. Unfortunately, it does not survive, but it went something along the lines of, to this man, General der Flieger Friedrich Christiansen, who was not known for being a lenient soul, but she appealed to that class thing. You know, if the circumstances were different, we would be traveling in the same circles. And because of this insanity called war, I'm here and you're there. You know, what have I done? There is no proof. Anyway, he granted her appeal. Now, this is a guy who ended up with it when there was a bit of a dust up in a village. He actually murdered a number of the villagers just to make sure that they knew who was in charge, because one of his officers was killed. So he took many lives for one. But he let her go. He commuted her sentence, and she was taken off to Anrath in the Rhineland to serve time in a penitentiary. Now, there was no distinction, and there should have been. Political prisoners should have been kept separate. But again, as a way of demoralizing and breaking them down, she was put in with common criminals, with the criminally insane. She was exposed to people she could never even have imagined existed in her life, or if they did, she certainly never thought she would come in contact with them. She slept in a prison cell that was designed for 4 people but accommodated twice as many. When you bathed, you were given a small bowl of water and a piece of clay soap that was to do your entire body. She was still menstruating at the time. You can imagine what it's like if you can't bathe. There was no toilet. It was a bucket in the middle of the floor that you used while everybody else was there. And it was emptied once a day, and then they would splash a little creosote in the bottom to keep the smell and to kind of disinfect it. Food rations, it was terrible. And she was treated better because she was better class, but she was still lumped in with these other people. So that was Anrath. She was transferred to Wiedenbrück, which was the place where they were manufacturing aircraft wings. She was quite ill for part of this. She suffered from bronchitis. She was permitted, again because of the class thing, she was permitted to keep vitamin tablets that she had taken with her. But that, an aspirin, what was that? So if you were put in the hospital or in the infirmary, all it did was separate you from other prisoners. There wasn't medicine. There wasn't real care. And she was given the task of knitting socks, right? So she'd knit these outfits for Belgian babies when she was 15. And as you heard Manda say, she got the wool, and you weren't supposed to break the wool more than 3 times